This is the Mitchell B-25, one of the most versatile fighting aircraft ever built. It was designed by North American Aviation of Inglewood, California. The first prototype rolled out for a test flight in January 1939. It was designed as a medium bomber with a crew of 5, pilot, co-pilot, bomber, radio waist gunner, and tail gunner. The plane was named for the man that was considered the father of American military aviation, General Billy Mitchell. The B-25 was powered by two 1,700 horsepower Curtiss Wright engines. The bomber could carry 2,400 pounds of bomb and cruise at a speed of 230 miles an hour. The plane had a range of 1,350 miles fully loaded. At the peak of her development, after many modifications, she was armed with 8 50 caliber machine guns in her nose, 2 50s in her tail, one on each side of her fuselage, and 2 50s in the turret on top of the aircraft. After the outbreak of World War II on December 7, 1941, the Mitchell was used to hunt for submarines all up and down the West Coast. A B-25 crew was credited with sinking the first submarine on the West Coast using a Mitchell B-25 bomber. The Mitchell didn't have to wait long for something special to make a name for herself. Early in 1942, a submarine Navy captain by the name of Francis Lowe saw 2 B-25s flying over the outline of an aircraft deck painted on a runway of a military airfield in Virginia. He got the idea that Army bombers just might be able to take off from an aircraft carrier and hit back the mainland of Japan in the name of Pearl Harbor. Captain Lowe took his idea to the Navy brass in the Pentagon, Admiral King, who liked the idea. General Arnold of the Army was recruited, and Doolittle was assigned to find bombers that could do the job. B-25 Mitchells were the only option. 2 B-25s were quickly dispatched to North Fork, Virginia, loaded aboard the newly built aircraft carrier, the Hornet. The way the Mitchells hopped off the Hornet gave General Harp Arnold of the Army and Admiral King of the Navy the confidence that the B-25 was capable of completing the mission. Navy Captain Duncan, who had been the naval attaché for the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo for several years prior to the war, was named the overall coordinator of the mission. The 17th Bomber Group, transferred to South Carolina from Washington, was chosen to fly the mission because they were the most experienced B-25 personnel in the Air Corps. Because of the danger of the mission, secret and very dangerous against heavy odds, men were not ordered to participate. They had to volunteer. The entire group volunteered. Doolittle put together his team, moved the training to Florida, and began to train them. The B-25s then needed to be modified to accomplish the mission. The planes were stripped of unnecessary hardware and extra rubber fuel tanks installed to increase the range of the bombers. A total of 1,241 gallons of fuel when loaded. The secret Norton bomb sights were replaced with a very simple $10 makeshift bomb sight, satisfactory for low-level operations. To make the plane even lighter, the twin 50 caliber rear guns were replaced with painted broomsticks. Each plane was to carry 4 500-pound bombs. The pilots had to learn to take off in a distance of a football field of 450 feet at the secret Elgin Field airstrip in Florida. In the meantime, Captain Duncan, coordinator of the mission, went to Pearl Harbor to meet with Admiral Nimitz and Halsey on the planned raid on Japan. During pilot training, the Hornet traveled from New Jersey to San Francisco. At the completion of the training, 24 planes and mechanics were ordered to fly at treetop level of San Francisco. After new propellers were installed in San Francisco, the best running 16 planes and the extra crews were lifted aboard and lashed onto the deck of the Hornet. The Hornet sailed out of the harbor within the next hour. Anyone seeing the Hornet would have thought planes were being delivered to Hawaii. 11 days later, on April 13th, the Hornet rendezvous with Task Force 16 out of Pearl Harbor, commanded by Admiral Halsey. The next day, the fleet had an announcement, and it was made that the Navy and the Army were teaming up to strike Japan. A huge cheer went up, and the Army and the Navy became a team. Doolittle's plan was to take off 450 miles from Japan. One thing that worried the commanders was early discovery of the task force by the Japanese patrol craft. It was pre-decided if spotted close to Hawaii, the planes would be launched and returned to Pearl Harbor. If discovered within the range of the Midway, they would abort to Midway. If out of the range of Midway and out of the range of Japan, the planes would be sacrificed to save the task force and would be pushed overside, so the Hornet's own fighters could protect the task force. If within range of Japan, the bombers would take off and bomb their targets, even if not enough gas to make it to China, and if they did fall into the hands of the Japanese. The closer to Japan, the more tense everyone became. Rough seas added to the long wait. Seasickness was common. Lashings on the deck had to be constantly tightened due to wet weather. One engine was completely replaced. Engines were started every day. Navy Captain Duncan, who knew Japan, helped pick the targets, and he also gave language lessons in case of capture or escape an invasion. Then on the morning of the April 18th, some 250 extra miles from their takeoff point, the task force spotted a Japanese fishing vessel picket ship on the horizon. Fearing the vessel had radioed the homeland, raced through the task force. Orders to launch the B-25s was given immediately by Commander Admiral Halsey. The little Japanese trailer was blown out of the water by two cruisers with their 6-inch guns and anti-aircraft artillery. That morning the weather was still very rough. There were heavy seas and a 30-knot wind blowing across the bow of the Hornet. Add the 20-knot speed of the Hornet, gave an effective 50-knot wind across the bow. The 50-knot wind made takeoff conditions an extra plus. More wind meant more lift, more up and down movement because of the strong winds. The Navy just had to make sure that the bow was rising up as the plane left the front of the deck. Jimmy Doolittle was the first to roll down the carrier deck, leave the Hornet, and head to Japan. Then 15 more B-25s left for Japan, 700 miles away, circling once to double-check their compasses and direction. Meanwhile, throughout Japan, the people of Japan were participating in a mock air raid drill when the Doolittle Raiders arrived in the morning. According to the Japanese war records, the air raid drill helped Doolittle's mission. Japanese defense forces at first thought the attacking Doolittle Raiders were part of a very realistic drill. Another Doolittle Raid advantage was all the planes came in from several different directions, further confusing any defense forces. The Doolittle Raid struck the Japanese mainland unopposed. The Doolittle Raiders approached their targets at treetop level and then climbed to 1,500 feet to drop their bombs. The reason for the altitude was to minimize damage to their aircraft from ground explosions. After dropping their payload, the pilots dove for the tree tops and headed for China, not knowing where the little fuel they had left would take them. The original plan was to head for friendly landing strips deep inside China. Low on fuel, most pilots did manage to make it to the east coast of China, which was Japanese-held territory, where they crash-landed or bailed out. One plane with engine trouble flew to Russia, where the crew was held in prison for the duration of the war. 5 men were killed in China, 4 by drowning when the plane crash-landed just off the China coast. 8 others were captured by troops loyal to the Japanese. Those that survived the raid made their way to Chongqing City in central China, where they were given a hero's welcome and decorated by Madame Chiang Kai-shek. The 8 captured raiders were given harsh treatment by the Japanese and labeled as war criminals. 3 were executed and 1 died of starvation. 4 were prisoners of war until they were released at the end of the war in 1945. The actual damage done by the raiders was little, but the raid was a stunning psychological blow to the Japanese people. It proved to Japan and to our citizens of the United States that the military could strike back during a war that was going very badly. More was accomplished in raising the nation's spirits. Japan saw in the raid that their homeland could be bombed. Japan recalled many of its much-needed planes from the war front to protect the homeland. Hundreds of planes that were desperately needed by the Japanese commanders. For handling of the mission, Doolittle was promoted to Brigadier General and awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor and assigned a new command in Europe. Of the 80 aircrews, 69 survived their historic mission and made it back to American territory.